Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on one of the most powerful, invisible forces shaping your entire world. We're talking everything from your morning coffee to your paycheck. Let's dive in.
It all kicks off with a really simple question, one you've probably asked yourself standing in the grocery store. Why is the organic stuff always more expensive than the regular stuff?
I mean, you see it everywhere, right? Even at the local farmer's market. You'd think, hey, less travel, lower prices, but nope, that organic apple still has a heftier price tag. So what's the deal?
Well, the answer isn't some big conspiracy. It's actually a simple but incredibly powerful economic code that pretty much runs our world. And today, you're going to learn how to read it.
To crack this code, we have to start with its fundamental laws. See, in any market, you've got these two big forces, demand and supply. They're in this constant dance. And where they finally meet, a price is born. So, first up is demand. Now, what's really important here is that in economics, demand isn't just about wanting something. It's about being both willing and, this is the key part, able to buy it. If you can't actually afford that new sports car, you don't really have what economists call effective demand.
Okay, check out this table. It shows you exactly how this works with something like gasoline. When the price is $1 a gallon, people are buying 800 million gallons. But when it shoots up to $2.20, whoa, demand drops way down to 420 million. It's a super simple relationship. As the price goes up, the amount we're willing to buy goes down.
Now, on the flip side of that deal, you've got supply. This is the seller's side of the story. And for them, a higher price is actually a good thing. It's an incentive. The more money they can get for their product, the more of it they're willing to make and sell.
So you've got these two opposing forces, right? Buyers want low prices, sellers want high prices. How does that ever get resolved? Well, they meet at something called the equilibrium price. You can think of it like the market's handshake. It's the one single price where the amount buyers want to buy perfectly matches the amount sellers want to sell.
And this is what that handshake looks like on a graph. You see that downward sloping demand curve? It meets the upward sloping supply curve at one single point. We call it E for equilibrium, and that one little point determines both the price and how much gets sold. It's basically the magic of the market, all in one simple picture.
Okay, so let's bring it all back to our organic apple and solve this thing. First, more people want organic food these days, right? That pushes the demand curve out. At the same time, organic farming is just plain more expensive and difficult for the farmers. That shifts the supply curve in. So where do these new curves meet? At a new, higher equilibrium price. And just like that, puzzle solved.
But here's where it gets really mind-blowing. This code doesn't just apply to apples and coffee. What if I told you the exact same logic, this whole dance of demand and supply, is what determines how much you get paid? Let's take a look.
Now, for this to make sense, you got to flip your thinking completely. In the market for stuff, like groceries, we're the buyers. But in the labor market, you and me, we're actually the sellers. We are supplying our time and our skills, and it's the companies that are doing the buying. It's a total role reversal.
Look at how this works for nurses. The supply of qualified nurses meets the demand from hospitals and clinics right at that point, E. And the result? An equilibrium salary of $85,000 a year for 41,000 nurses. That's it, your salary, right there, determined by demand and supply. And technology throws a huge wrench in all of this. For some lower-skilled jobs, tech can be a substitute. Think self-checkout lanes. That shifts demand for those workers to the left, pushing wages down. But for high-skilled jobs, tech is often a complement. It makes workers more productive. That shifts demand to the right and pushes wages up. And that right there helps explain the growing wage gap we hear so much about.
So what happens when we try to step in and set a wage by law, like with the so-called living wage? Well, in this model, that acts as a price floor. See, if the market equilibrium is $10 an hour, but the law says you have to pay 15, look what happens. More people want to work at that higher wage, but fewer companies want to hire at that higher cost. That gap? Well, that gap represents a surplus of labor, or, in simpler terms, unemployment.
So how big of an effect is this in the real world? Well, it's one of the most heavily debated topics in economics, but a lot of studies have tried to measure it. A typical finding is that for every 10% increase in the minimum wage, the hiring of low-skilled workers tends to drop by about 1 to 2%.
Of course, it's a really complex issue, and it's important to know that some economists, like Walter Williams and Thomas Sowell, argue that by setting that price floor, minimum wage laws can actually create a barrier for the lowest skilled workers, making it harder for them to get that crucial first job and start climbing the ladder.
Okay, so this code applies to groceries, and it applies to our jobs. But believe it or not, it goes even deeper. The very same logic of demand and supply also sets the price of money itself. Let's head over to the financial markets.
Think about your credit card. The price of borrowing that money is just the interest rate you pay. The supply of money comes from banks willing to lend it, and the demand comes from us, the people who want to borrow it. And where do those two lines meet? Right there at point E, which gives us the equilibrium interest rate. In this case, 15%. See? Same model, just a different market.
So we've seen this code work for apples, for salaries, for loans, but let's just step back. Why does any of this really matter? Why is understanding this simple little model so important? Well, it's because prices are so much more than just numbers.
This is the big takeaway. Prices are not arbitrary. They are powerful, powerful messengers. In just a single number, they carry a ton of information about how much of something is out there and how badly society wants it.
And all of this leads us to a really ancient piece of wisdom: don't kill the messenger. If you don't like the message a price is sending you, like, say, a really high price for something that's scarce, just getting mad at the price doesn't actually solve the underlying problem.
When governments try to control prices, they're essentially trying to shoot the messenger. But here's the thing. Price controls don't change the reality of demand and supply. They just cover it up, and that can lead to really terrible things like shortages or massive surpluses. The tragic famine during China's Great Leap Forward is a pretty stark historical example of what can happen when those price messages for food get silenced.
So now that you know how to read the code of demand and supply, I want you to just take a look around. Think about your rent, your salary, the cost of a flight home for the holidays. What price in your life makes a little more sense to you now?